What's going on, guys? Today we're going to be talking about the factory method pattern. So let's just jump right into it. So before we move on to actually going on to the code and talking about it, I gotta let you know that there are 4 different types of factory patterns, okay? So the one we're going to be talking about and the one Gang of 4 talks about is the factory method pattern. Now that's one of them. The other 3 are abstract factory pattern, static factory method, and then the simple factory, also known as the factory. But if someone says we're going to be using the factory pattern, you best make sure that you know which pattern they're talking about, okay? So like I said, on this one, we're going to be talking about the factory method pattern. So the Gang of 4 defines it as define an interface for creating an object, but let subclasses decide which class to instantiate. Factory method lets a class defer instantiation to subclasses. It's better if I just show you an example. Now this file would represent my main client application, and within this file I'm using 2 classes directly, the shopper and the employee. On line 4 and 5, which is right here, we're creating a couple user interfaces. One of them is a shopper and the other one is an employee. Now using these constructors directly within my client is okay, but problems may start to occur as my application expands. So let's say I have, let me just paste it. So let's say I have even more types of users: distributors, drivers, managers, and developers. Now keeping track of all the constructors required to create all of these different object types can become a little bit chaotic. This is where you might want to consider using the factory method. So instead of using these classes directly within our client application, we're going to use a factory method instead. So I can import something called, instead of importing this, I could import something called var user factory. It's going to equal require I'm a little bit slow, sorry about that. Require user factory. And instead of using the instances to create instances of my users, I'll actually let the factory decide which type of users to create. So this one right here will create a new shopper, user factory, and this one will create a new employee, user factory. But I do need to actually add a little bit more data to this one. We want to let the factory know that this is going to be an employee. Okay, so by sending one more argument to this one method, we will get it to return the right type of instance. So let's create our factory method, or our factory. So inside our factory, we're going to create a new directory. So not directory, a new file called user factory. So in this file, we will actually use all the classes required to create objects. So we do need the employee, so we'll require employee. Oops. Okay, and then we're going to be grabbing I want my shortcuts, my shopper class as well. Control save. And we're also going to be creating a user factory function. And we're also going to be exporting that function. So module exports equals user factory. All right. This is supposed to be a function, so sorry about that. It's going to equal, and I'm going to use ES6. Now, this function is going to be taking in some arguments, specifically the name of the user to create, how much money they have and what type of user they are. So type what type of user they are. So employee, you know, and optionally an employer if they want to say. Okay, I spelled all that wrong. Employer. And we will be using this information to decide which type of object to return. So if type is equal to employee, we want to return a new instance of an employee with the name, money, and employer. Else, we just want to return a new instance of shopper with the name and money. All right. Now that we have a factory method that can create employees or shoppers, let's try it out. Let's see if it actually works. I'm gonna cd into my design. What is this called? Factory. And I'm going to do node dot, and I do get my objects back. So I got my name, web dev journey, money $100, and I'm not employed. Sad. So Mike John Long John Silver has money $100, and he is employed, and his employer is Original Inc. And we can actually go back inside the client file, and since Mike is employed, we have a slightly different type of object. We can give Mike a payday. And since I hate Mike, I'm not going to give him that much of a payday. Mike is only going to get payday $1 because I hate Mike. So if we actually run this again, you see that I still have $100 and Mike has 101. Screw Mike. But the benefit of using the factory method is to encapsulate everything that we need to create users within one method. But this is an example of how the factory method can be beneficial to helping our applications as they grow and change. Now let's go into the pros and cons and when would you want to use this. So for the pros and cons, the pros, you can avoid tight coupling between the creator and the concrete products. You have the single responsibility principle, which is you can move the product creation code into one place in the program, making the code easier to support. You also have the open close principle, which is you can introduce new types of products into the program without breaking existing client code. Now for the cons, the code may become more complicated since you need to introduce a lot of new subclasses to implement the pattern. The best case scenario is when you're introducing the pattern into an existing hierarchy of creator classes. Moving on to when you should use them. So you should use the factory method when you don't know beforehand the exact types and dependencies of the objects your code should work with. Okay. So the factory method separates product construction code from the code that actually uses the product, right? Therefore, it's easier to extend the product construction code independently from the rest of the code. An example of this is when you try to add a new product to an app. It doesn't matter which app, you just try to add a new product. You'll only need to create a new creator subclass and override the factory method in it. That's all you have to do. Another one should be you should use the factory method when you want to provide users of your library or framework with a way to extend its internal components. All right. So the inheritance is probably the easiest way to extend the default behavior of a library or framework. But how would the framework recognize that your subclass should be used instead of the standard component? So there is a solution, and that is to reduce the code that constructs component across the framework into a single factory method and let anyone override this method in addition to extending the component itself. Now, another one would be use a factory method when you want to save system resources by reusing existing objects instead of rebuilding them each time. Now, this is the one most people might be using it for. You know, you often experience this when you're dealing with large resource intensive objects such as database connections, file systems, and network resources. So you need to think about how this is actually done. What I mean by that is think about what has to be done to reuse an existing object. All right. So first you need to create some storage to keep track of all the created objects. Then when someone requests an object, the program should look for a free object inside that pool. All right. And then it should return the client code. It should return it to the client code. I don't know why I'm stuttering so much. After that, if there's no free objects, the program should create a new one and add it to the pool. And it must all be put into a single place so that you don't populate the program with duplicate code. Now, probably the most obvious and convenient place where this code could be placed is the constructor of the class whose objects we're trying to reuse. However, a constructor must always return new objects by definition. It can't return existing instances. Therefore, you need to have a regular method capable of creating new objects as well as reusing existing ones. Now, if you didn't get it, what I just said, it's the factory method. That's exactly what I said. All right, it's just the factory method pattern. But guys, like I said in the last video, and I'm gonna keep on saying this in every video that I make for design patterns, this is very conversational topic. All right, design patterns overall is conversational. You could argue with someone about the same goddamn thing and you wouldn't get anywhere. So I would advise you to do your own research on design patterns, especially different ones that we're talking about now. But that is it for this video, guys, and I hope you liked it. Please consider subscribing. Like it if you learned something, dislike it if you have a problem with it. I'm pretty sure some will. And leave a comment down below on where would you use a factory method, the pattern factory method, god damn it, the factory method pattern. But thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next video.